Hello and welcome to this presentation or tutorial about historical metronome markings and tempo. This presentation is part of my tempo project, and today I would like to give an account of the scientific situation as I see it, and doing this also take a critical yet positive look on the somewhat notorious double beat theory that has, in a way, troubled the musical world, and which I have introduced in my Beethoven a tempo videos. Metronome markings from the first years and decades after the invention of the metronome have been a problem for a very long time. Already in the second half of the 19th century, they were criticized and questioned, and always for the same reason, for being excessively fast. More recently, these metronome markings have become the subject of scientific research, resulting in different publications and articles with very different models of explanation. While some researchers see historical metronome markings as an expression of an excessively fast performance practice and style, other researchers claim the opposite and say that our understanding of historical metronome markings is wrong, and that the performance practice was in fact much slower than we are used to today. The latter theory, the slow theory, was first presented in 1980 by Willem Retsey Talsma in his famous book Die Wiedergeburt der Klassiker. Quite a few publications about the same topic followed until today. The theory is called double beat theory, a term that I will explain later. Also whole beat theory or full beat theory in more recent publications. Also, for a few years now, the theory has been presented again widely, mainly through social media. From its inception, the double beat theory has been met with controversy. It has evoked rather strong reactions, both to defend it and to disprove it. And observing and participating in discussions about that theory, it is interesting and also somewhat disturbing to see that these discussions often appear to be influenced by some sort of ideology rather than pure science. Also, it is quite obvious that in many publications on the subject since 1980, the choice and analysis of sources are not free from a certain biased focus sometimes, as well as a simple disregard of sources that contradict a desired result. As a result of this, the whole theory, the whole approach became discredited, which is, in some respects, understandable, given the sometimes dubious presentations of sources, but along with discrediting the entire theory, the possible eligibility of parts of the theory was put out of sight as well. And this is a problem too, because there are parts of the theory that are worth serious consideration. So in this short tutorial today, I would like to try a more objective approach to the subject. I will display the historical situation and talk about actual options resulting from these historical sources. I will also take a critical look at the double beat theory. Hopefully, this will allow to be better oriented in a sometimes slightly confusing field. And also, hopefully, this tutorial will contribute to a real scientific and musical discussion about the notorious tempo questions connected to early metronome markings. So let's start with some general historical background. In 1868, Hans von Bülow published his famous selection of piano etudes by Johann Baptist Cramer. He added an editorial where he talks about numerous questions that are connected to studying these etudes. In this context, he also discusses the topic of tempo. He says that the original metronome markings given by Cramer had remained unchanged in his new edition, despite the fact that these markings, in Bülow's opinion, are to be questioned. I quote from the original English editorial: "With reference to the metronomic signs, which, as has been said already, are copied exactly from the original, we cannot conceal that to us they appear excessively fast in the majority of cases, not merely in respect to the time to be taken in practicing them, but also to that appropriate to their delivery simply as pieces of music." End of quote. So this is a pretty distinct criticism. And with his criticism, Bülow does not stand alone. We find comparable comments by Heinrich Germer in his edition of Czerny Etudes, or by Theodor Kullak in his edition of Chopin Etudes, to name two examples. Kullak introduces the term music box effects to characterize metronome markings given by Czerny and later on Chopin. Some of the authors also come up with explanations for these mysterious metronome markings. Bülow presumes defective metronomes as a reason, and Kullak mentions the lighter touch of period pianos and a presumed general taste for high speed. And both suggest significant reductions in tempo to achieve an accurate interpretation. And this basically has been the main practice from performers ever since. If we take Chopin's etudes as an example and compare qualified recordings with the actual metronome markings, we find significant differences, all of them in favor of a clearly slower tempo. So the decision not to take the traded metronome markings too seriously is almost like an unspoken agreement. And this is exactly the point where the double beat theory started in the first place. Talsma, for instance, said that composers like Chopin were beyond doubt serious about their metronome markings. If they appear to be inaccurate, then it's perhaps not them, but our understanding that is inaccurate. Before we have a closer look at this, we need to talk about an important premise in this context, and that is the general way we count music. When the metronome came up at the beginning of the 19th century, two different understandings of the term beat, or Schlag in German, in terms of conducting music can be found. On one hand, beat or Schlag is defined as a full movement down and up again, very much like the definition of a full vibration in physics. On the other hand, the same term is used to describe not a full, but a single movement down or up. I would like to present two examples for this. The first one is a little older because it represents the old metric understanding of music. It's from a school book from 1642, and there the following definition is given. I quote, "They shall make the time visible by beating up and down with the hand, and say that this shall be called a beat if one beats down with the hand while singing and rises back up again." This definition takes into account that when we do this movement, our down movement is supported by gravity, whereas the up movement is not. Therefore, our perception of the two movements is not entirely equal. So it is natural not to count the single movements of the arm, but only count the downbeat, so forming a whole beat out of two single movements. This goes back, in fact, to the old metric system where the whole bar, taktus, is equated with a whole beat and is then divided into half beats. This system was still part of the common doctrine in the 19th century. In contrast to this definition of the term beat, another definition can be found. This is now a definition from the famous Schilling Encyclopedia in 1840. I quote, "Beat. First of all, every abrupt change of position, elevation, lowering, lateral movement, or actual upbeat of the conductor with the hand or the baton in order to indicate the time. Hereof, a second meaning is deduced that identifies the term beat as part of the time, because ordinarily every part of the time is marked by a beat or a yank of the conductor. Yank in German refers to the word Ruck, which explicitly refers to a jerky movement from one location to another and not back again. So, while the first definition clearly has a full or double beat in mind, the second one offers a just as clear single beat definition. And this now is the actual starting point of the double beat theory, because the core question here is, which definition or understanding of beat or Schlag did composers apply when they used the metronome? Answering this question, the theory suggests that composers actually did apply a full or whole understanding of the term beat or Schlag, at least in many of the cases. Therefore, so says the double beat theory, they used the metronome differently than we do it today. They linked the scale of the metronome not to the single motions of the pendulum, but to full motions, full vibrations. The musical consequences of this are obvious. The tempo indicated by the metronome marking would actually be halved. Things would become much slower. The tempo practice would be something radically different from what we are used to today. The style of performance regarding tempo that we have today would appear to be rather far away from what composers in the 19th century had in mind. I presented this to some extent in my Beethoven a tempo videos, so if you like to learn more about it, just have a look at those videos. From a purely theoretical point of view, and regardless of any actual observations, the likelihood of that idea, of that double beat theory, is rather high. Since the definition of beat as a full vibration shows in sources of the time, it is quite natural to presume that the movement of a metronome could be understood in the same way. In fact, it does not require a lot of imagination to come up with that idea. In addition, a look at the musical outcome of the theory offers some rather fascinating aspects. We would face no less than a solution to any problems connected to seemingly speedy metronome markings and music box effects. Also, the musical aesthetic resulting from the theory appears to be intriguing, notably because it is so different from the 20th century tradition. However, like any theory, the double beat theory has to be verified in view of the actual observations in the landscape of metronome markings and theoretical sources from the 19th century. And here, despite its basic plausibility, the theory faces substantial contrariness.